Here I've drawn some patterns taken from this ceramic object, and this is where I have to abstract utilitarian objects from around the house, and I did it in a linear way here and a more blocky and coloured way here. And then contrasting against that, I decided to use black and white as I didn't want to form a colour palette too early, and I've drawn very figuratively here, and I've got the same pattern as the first page because I quite like that. And I recreated that pattern on cloth using a quilting technique, and I quite like the gold thread against the navy toasted cloth. I thought the contrasting colours were quite complementary. And then here I play around with abstract forms again, and I made a little book. And this is where I used tape, protractors, rulers to draw with, which was quite restrictive. I've got some fabric manipulation going on here. This is where I started to form a personal collection, and I created this word collage on Photoshop. And this is where I start to look at shiny things. And then this is where I start to look at birds. Some more collaging. And I quite like the symmetrical look with this collage, which is something that I definitely want to take forward to in major. Some more collaging. I really enjoyed continuous line drawing as I thought it was quite freeing, and this is where I did some layering with different mediums. And then on the right is quite simple and sophisticated and neat, and I really like the use of gold, which is featured a lot in my project. And then here is where I started to draw birds, specifically magpies. And in this piece I did some machine stitching as well as hand beading, and I decided to stain the cotton with tea bags, as this creates quite an earthy look linking to nature, and I didn't want to leave the cotton boring and blank. And then here I've got my matchbox collection, and I've done some more continuous line drawing, and this is where I start to form a colour palette. I've got some more stitching over here, using fabric layering. I've got some machine stitch, some hand embroidery. I used some fabric crayons for the drawings in the background. And then this is where I use the Adobe Colour app to change the shapes and the thicknesses of the line of my Matchbox collection, and I recreated this here using fine liners, and I did the same over here but contrasting against that with more of a grainy effect. And in order to achieve this I decided to use charcoal, as I thought it would be the perfect medium to use. And moving on from that, I created a resist technique using oil pastel, charcoal, inks, etc., which I thought worked quite nicely with the previous one. And then I decided to take to the V&A for inspiration, and I wanted to create a lino design. The first two weren't as successful, but I gathered that I needed to roll the ink out more for a cleaner look. And I needed like another layer of ink in order to create this crisp and clean look I've got in the corner. And I played around with it on different papers, as well as using different colour ink. And this is where I play around with creating repeats ready for major. And I've also incorporated my collection into it. And then this is just a recap of what I'm doing with my project, my concept, and my favourite things from my collection so far. And then this is where I really start to think about my concept and how magpies are attracted to shiny things. And I did this through Photoshop, just made a little collage. And this is just some design ideas, how I spoke about symmetry earlier on in my book. how I'd like to include that in major, some damask elements. And then this is where I play around with colour palettes. I think I'm going to go along with colour palette 2 because it's quite mature, dark and rich, which is the look that I want to create. And then these are some detailed drawings in my collection. And these took me a while. I decided to use fine liners to create a detailed stippling technique. And then again, but I drew a magpie. And then here I used the Adobe app to create some repeat patterns of the jewellery from my collection. And I thought it was quite Moroccan looking, which is quite interesting. And I definitely want to look into that in major. And then I did some hand-drawn visualisations of cushions using these patterns. And that's my sketchbook.